So we're going to be uploading a small number of videos. The format will be slightly different sometimes from before. In this case, we're just looking at a poster of the film, although we're still going to be discussing thoughts and feelings on this particular number. I can imagine some groaning, maybe not. There's this whole thing of, well, Snatch and the Guy Ritchie films in general, Lock, Stock Before That, which I've uploaded a video on, so up here. There's this idea that these films are of that post-Tarantino, Gen X zeitgeist, young people on the internet around that time, or up to the year, say, 2012 to 15, they were going on the net and talking about how films like Pulp Fiction and Lock, Stock, Reservoir Dogs, or Snatch, Sexy Beast, Trainspotting, these films from these kind of gun-oriented, very male films from the 90s and 2000s. These are some of the greatest films of all time, they believed, and they were going to champion these forever. And then by the mid-2010s, or even the earlier 2010s, people were coming around to say, you know what, we don't like that edgy 90s moment anymore. And then these films are just juvenile, and they were just totally appealing to kind of instant memorability and moments which could be replayed in YouTube clips. I think that's what people were reducing these films to. They weren't truly meaningful. They weren't the slow cinema that was homaging Angelopoulos. It wasn't a picked upon Recifacal. It was nothing. I love the slow cinema, by the way. I think it's magnificent. I also feel as though that world of Tarantino and Guy Ritchie and Danny Boyle, that kind of real Gen X, those Gen X films that were championed by younger people at that time, which kind of fell out of favor as being too male oriented. It's fair enough that certain films ought not be overemphasized in the grand scheme of things. Although I'm hesitant that these films be dismissed. I actually think they were remarkable contributions to the medium, and I think that a lot of the young people praising them at the time, championing them as valid continuations of the tradition of great cinema, I think they were right. They're very binary in positing only a few films at any given time as the classics, and it was very Anglophile, or Anglophone rather, centric view of cinema, with maybe some nods to the 20th century films of Kurosawa or Leone. Well, they're all 20th century films, obviously, but there was not an interest in looking at non-Western filmmakers outside of, say, John Woo, maybe at one time for this crowd. And obviously Snatch is just too British, both for the British and for the non-British. To the Brits, it can seem an attempt to sell, UK idiosyncrasies offshore, and to non-Brits, it can just come across as this really obnoxious slice of insular, domestic, and other cultures' humour, which we're just not privy to, and it just becomes annoying. It's just like, why do we need to claim English culture / humour is always going to be the best? Why is this great English comedy so much better than the great French or Lithuanian or Chinese or Singaporean comedy? I don't know, but a lot of people seem to love Snatch still, whether they're UK viewers or not, English language viewers or not even. Though it helps, I imagine, to know the English language relatively well, at least, because this film often can be appreciated more so maybe with subtitles. One likes being in a mess, in enjoying the kind of overload of Snatch's input, although not that Snatch is the most complicated film ever made, although it is easy to imagine maybe the more casual viewers being slightly put off by it not being a relaxing, easy night in with some popcorn. And I'm not trying to put anyone down, and I think that there are many who would go, oh, Snatch isn't complicated, you're putting people down by claiming it would be. I guess. The thing I like most about Snatch, it's all of the visual components of the film. Not necessarily the gimmickry of the editing, but the way it transforms these British gangster characters, kind of downstream and mutated from a Long Good Friday-esque archetype, into these hyperactive comic book characters. I really love, this is like, you can imagine some, Dark Horse comics, London gangsters, and it appearing in that medium, steroid, hyper exaggerated, just these really inane and animated take on a criminal underworld with these larger-than-life figures, partly inspired by the strangeness of actual, criminal figures from history, such as it's easy to imagine the Cray brothers being a unique Guy Ritchie creation when not contemplating the fact that these are real individuals. They were portrayed by Tom Hardy in a relatively recent film. By relatively recent, we're talking about 9 years ago now, though. And by a couple of members of Spandau Ballet in 1990, I believe. The film directed by Peter Medak, The Craze? Yes. And Snatch does the Evil Dead thing of transforming the cartoon into a live-action feature, or what Louis Malle did with Zazie in 1960 even. It's for one of these hyperactive steroid criminal underworld comic book series of that kind of edgy end of history, testosterone, adolescent, indulgent masturbatory 90s moment of the comic book medium, transfers it onto the silver screen with Snatch. And it's the excitement one feels for the over-the-top exaggerated archetypes in Snatch that I think makes it one of the more enjoyable films of that era. And I find it ruthlessly rewatchable. It's just this world where these characters inhabit. They're all so well defined and colourful. They interact with one another. There's these extraordinary instances where it's a gritty, ugly depiction of an environment that appears as though it's the real world, although it grants its recognizable, identifiable, non-fantasy properties with the characteristics which make us enjoy the imaginative leaps and bounds of genre fantasy, comic booky superhero, light superhero fiction. There's almost an enjoyment now, it's very mainstream and popular now, but even at this time, in, say, the turn of the millennium, that there was an enjoyment in reading, in comic book form, the experiences of the shared universe that was Marvel's New York City, with the Avengers and Spider-Man and Iron Man, and then the X-Men upstate, like all these figures kind of interacting within the politics of one fictional universe. And obviously there was the Justice League, which had that really strong animated show around this time, and it was fascinating to witness all these different players with unique characteristics kind of try to make sense and interact and work together within this hyper exaggerated re-illustration of our own world, be it of 616 or whatever we want to term either that Bruce Timm Justice League universe, let's say. What Snatch does is realize this within what could have been an otherwise fairly plain and, though potentially riveting and action-packed, gangster epic. Characters such as Mickey O'Neill, Boris the Blade, Bullet Tooth Tony, Frankie Four Fingers, and Bricktop are all easy to imagine in a comic book. That they're obviously not going to. You're not going to witness them in the cinema verite documentary about London's criminal underworld. You will witness them in a fictional piece which feels as though that environment is so dynamic and bizarre and unreal to our own more sanitized sensibilities of stable modern life. It's like this bizarre outlaw Wild West occurring within the heart of a city that no one really is aware of without proper connections that they don't really want to have, likely as not. And this is itself fodder for essentially superpowers fiction, rather than having to give everyone an excuse to have been exposed to nuclear or cosmic radiation of some kind. They were just born of their bitter and difficult, trying circumstances, trying to make their way in the London criminal underworld. I think that's the continuing appeal of Snatch, if nothing else, because the editing may be considered a staple of its time now. The intricate screenplay might be considered gimmicky or not as clever as it thinks it is now. I remember a point where we got to people complaining that people who felt as though the film, I'm not saying it was a smart film or an unintelligent film either, Nolan's Inception was, audiences are going to think this is a complicated film, but it's actually, no, it's dumb or whatever. Snatch is not as complex as Inception, and we've gotten to a point where most audiences can appreciate Inception, so something like Snatch, which we can all agree is not as intricate as Inception, where we think either film is elaborate or intricate or interesting or hard to follow or not. And so that appeal of Snatch may have disappeared to a casual audience as well. It may also seem gimmicky. Where the continued appeal of Snatch will lie, whether superheroes, comic book fiction, superpowered entities are in vogue in media or not, is Snatch inviting us into that world where these hyper-exaggerated, steroid-induced versions of British criminal underworld archetypes exist, interact, and it culminates in all of these kind of characters with backstories, though backstories we never get to see. They're only inferred and kind of brought upon us via their presence in the current moments of the film. And then we're invited into what is essentially a superior Infinity Gems duology film, except it's these players we're being introduced to for the first time, and they all come together. We see who lives, who dies, who makes it out, and there's no hackneyed resurrection gimmick, because it's meant to be set in our reality. Just a depiction of our reality which is, you could say, I don't want to say more exciting, because it's not to say that action movie or comic book violence is going to make the world more exciting anyway. Obviously, no one thinks more violence in the real world is going to be a good thing. No one's serious anyway. It's demonstrating how bizarre the world is and human establishments can be, in this case, London's criminal underworld, how larger than life that it's almost as though we realise we're taking for granted the idiosyncrasies and oddities, the uncanniness of some of the world around us, and we're reducing our appreciation for it when we indulge in overly fantastical fiction as opposed to fiction which animates the world around us in a more grounded fashion. Snatch compared to the Justice League. I don't know if anyone has ever compared these two properties before, but let's do that here. And in this video, before I speak and bite my tongue more so, it's about to fall off. Let's prevent that from happening. I might be able to catch it.